Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. All thanks and praise are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may His peace and blessings upon His last and final messenger, His family, His companions, and those who follow them until the end of times. Alhamdulillah, last week we covered the meanings and lessons of verses 69 to 82 of Surah al-Ṣāffāt. So inshallah tonight the plan is to go through and explore the lessons and meanings of verses 83 to 98. And we'll start off like we do every week again by reciting the verses first. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإن من شيعته لإبراهيم إذ جاء ربه بقلب سليم إذ قال لأبيه وقومه ماذا تعبدون أئفكا آلهة دون الله تريدون فما ظنكم برب العالمين فنظر نظرة في النجوم فقال إني سقيم فتولوا عنه مدبرين فراغ إلى آلهتهم فقال ألا تأكلون ما لكم لا تنطقون فراغ عليهم ضربا باليمين فأقبلوا إليه يزفون قال أتعبدون ما تنحتون والله خلقكم وما تعملون قالوا ابنوا له بنيانا فألقوه في الجحيم فأرادوا به كيدا فجعلناهم الأسفلين. So just as a really quick reminder, in these verses that we're exploring currently, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He briefly mentions the story of Nuh alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave us a very summarized version of the story to highlight certain lessons and certain reminders. And these stories, they're being mentioned briefly in order to console, to comfort and reassure the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, while at the same time delivering a veiled threat and warning to the non-believers of Mecca. So these stories, they are meant to inspire the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions to remain patient and strong and steadfast, reminding them that Allah's help, assistance, support, and care is always with the community of the believers. So that's one of the objectives of these verses, to give this consolation, this reassurance to the believers. But at the same time, it is a veiled threat and warning to the non-believers of Mecca, that if you continue to oppose and reject the Prophet ﷺ, then you will experience a similar fate as these past nations and communities. Now the surah, it transitions into the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And it mentions two episodes from his life. The first, it shows him advocating faith among his people and destroying their idols, followed by their attempt to assassinate him, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then saved him. And this particular episode, it's described in more detail in Surah Ibrahim. The second scene is only mentioned here in Surah al-Ṣāffāt. It speaks of Ibrahim alayhi salam's dream, his sacrifice, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then released his son Ismail alayhi salam. And this story is given in detail, speaking of stages and attitudes in a remarkably fine and effective style, and it shows the most perfect example of absolute submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sacrifice and self-surrender. So these two scenes, these two episodes, they are meant to be very instructive. That we are supposed to read them, understand them, analyze them, study them, and extract these reminders, these lessons, these morals and guidance that we're supposed to apply to our practical daily lives. And the common theme that brings both of these stories together is Ibrahim alayhi salam's absolute submission to the will of Allah. That he was ready to surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any hesitation whatsoever. So in verse 83, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts by saying, وَإِنَّ مِن شِيعَتِهِ لَإِبْرَاهِيمَ. And indeed, one of those who followed his way was Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He opens the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam by reminding us that he was among those who followed the way of Nuh alayhi salam. He's not bringing anything new. He's not bringing about a new religion, a new system of belief. He is preaching the exact same message that was preached by Nuh alayhi salam. He followed the same system of belief and way of life as Nuh alayhi salam, and all other prophets and messengers, affirming the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inviting others towards it, and remaining steadfast upon it. And it's important for us to remember and understand that every single prophet and messenger throughout history was sent to call and invite their communities to Islam. That they all had the same fundamental beliefs. Every single prophet and messenger believed in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the idea of al-Risala, the idea of prophethood and messengership, and the idea of life after death. All the prophets and messengers, they encouraged the same values, morals, ethics, and they all lived a life of service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and others. So all of the prophets, starting with Adam alayhi salam, all the way until the last and final messenger, our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they're all links on the same exact chain. They were sent to mankind to bring them back to Allah, to remind them about their Lord and Creator, to worship Him alone without any partners, to serve Him and to serve mankind, to embody these morals and these values and ethics. So every prophet and messenger followed the path of Islam, and all of them were Muslim. إِذْ جَاءَ رَبَّهُ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. Remember when he came to his Lord with a pure heart. Or remember when he came to his Lord with a sound heart. So this verse, it's being addressed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That remember the narrative, remember the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he came to his Lord with qalbin salim. When he turned toward his Lord with a pure heart, with a sound heart, a heart that was full of genuine and sincere faith, reliance, trust, and patience. A heart that was pure of any doubts or insincere motives. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's highlighting his sound heart, which makes him a man of true faith and clear conscience. So this is an image of complete submission as represented in Ibrahim alayhi salam turning to his Lord. And the use of the adjective salim, sound or pure, it gives very clear meanings. And at the same time, it is easy and clear, giving strong connotations of purity, sincerity, and straightforward understanding. So this idea of qalbun salim is very important within the framework of Islam. That we understand that as human beings, we are not simply composed of a physical body. Rather, we are a combination of this physical body as well as a soul. And the soul is what gives this physical body life. And just as the physical body has a heart, the soul also has a heart. And that is the center of Iman, that is the center of understanding, that's the center of our conscience. And that is where the seed of Iman is planted, that is where we get our sincerity from, and that is our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, he turned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with this sound, pure, sincere, clear heart. And because of his sound heart, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he took exception to the practices of his people. The purity of his heart made him feel uncomfortable with idol worship. And this was motivated by his sound sense, which recoiled from any idea or behavior that conflicted with essential human nature. Because every human being is born upon al-fitrah. Every human being is born upon this natural disposition to recognize, acknowledge, and accept the existence of the divine. To recognize, accept, and acknowledge the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because of his pure heart, he found himself to be very uncomfortable and uneasy with the idol worship of his community. And that is why he objected to the idol worship of his father and his community إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ وَقَوْمِهِ مَاذَا تَعْبُدُونَ? And remember when he said to his father and his people, what are you worshipping? أَإِفْكًا آلِهَةً دُونَ اللَّهِ تُرِيدُونَ? Is it false gods that you desire instead of Allah? فَمَا ظَنُّكُمْ بِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ? What then do you expect from the Lord of the worlds? So when he saw his father, when he saw his community worshipping statues and idols, he disapprovingly asked them, مَاذَا تَعْبُدُونَ? Like literally, what in the world are you worshipping? Why are you worshipping these idols, these statues that you sculpted with your own two hands? And this is, again, a consequence of his pure heart. That what are these inanimate objects, these statues and idols made out of stone and wood that you are devoting yourself to in worship? He found it to be absolutely absurd. It made no sense to him whatsoever. أَإِفْكًا آلِهَةً دُونَ اللَّهِ تُرِيدُونَ? Is it false gods that you desire instead of Allah? That these statues and idols, they are false deities. They don't have the power or ability to help you, let alone help themselves. So this is one of several passages in the Quran in which Ibrahim a.s. debates with his people regarding the absurdity of worshipping idols. And the Quran, it invokes the story of Ibrahim a.s. in the context of the Prophet's discussion with the polytheists of Mecca. So every time we come across one of the stories of Ibrahim a.s., particularly him objecting to idol worship, it's mentioned and revealed in the context of our Prophet Muhammad ﷺ objecting to the idol worship of his own community. And one of the wisdoms behind that is because the people of Mecca still had a lot of respect for Ibrahim a.s. That they themselves claimed that we are still upon his way of life, we're still upon his traditions, we're still upon his customs. So by invoking the name of Ibrahim a.s., the Prophet ﷺ was making his message more effective. That you claim to be following the way of Ibrahim a.s., but you're mistaken. Ibrahim a.s. is someone who found idol worship to be absurd. He is someone who recognized the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of his pure heart. And if you continue to worship these false idols and you devote yourselves to them, what then do you expect from the Lord of all the worlds? فَمَا ظَنُّكُمْ بِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ? What do you think will happen to you when you meet your Lord on the day of judgment? So this line of questioning from Ibrahim a.s., it is a form of rebuke, of reprimand and warning. Now here in Surah al-Ṣāffāt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not tell us how His community responded. Instead, it fast forwards and it moves directly to the next scene, showing us what He had decided to do in order to confront the false beliefs and practices of His people. And more details of this conversation that took place between them are found in Surah al-Anbiya, which we covered, I believe, a few years ago. So then here we are told, فَنَظَرَ نَظْرَةً فِي النُّجُومِ. He later looked up into the stars in contemplation and thought. فَقَالَ إِنِّي سَقِيمٌ. And he said, I am sick. فَتَوَلَّوْا عَنْهُ مُدْبِرِينَ. So they turned their backs on him and went away. Now, according to the story, according to the Quranic narrative, Ibrahim a.s., right, he is having this conversation with his people. And he wants them to realize and recognize that there's no benefit whatsoever in worshiping statues and idols. It's totally absurd. It makes no rational sense whatsoever. And every single year, his community, they would celebrate some sort of festival outside the city. And then after that, they would come back and worship their idols. And they would begin the day by placing fruit or food in front of their false gods for blessing. Then they would go outside of the city to various areas and locations to celebrate and enjoy. And then at night, they would return to their idols. So Ibrahim a.s., he recognized that he had to do something drastic in order for his people to recognize the absurdity of their beliefs and practices. So he devised this plan. He came up with a plan to destroy their idols while they were outside of the city enjoying their festival. And when they came back and saw their so-called gods couldn't even defend themselves, perhaps they would come to their senses. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, he realized and recognized that my debating with them and discussing with them is of no benefit. There's some sort of lock on their hearts and minds. They're unable to comprehend and understand the truth. They cannot see the absurdity of their own beliefs and practices. So he felt like he had to do something drastic, something that would wake them up, something that would shake them and bring them back to their senses. So on the day his people went to go celebrate their annual festival, Ibrahim alayhi salam excused himself by saying that he was sick, and then he carried out his plan. So فَنَظَرَ نَظْرَةً فِي النُّجُومِ, he later looked up to the stars in contemplation and thought, فَقَالَ إِنِّي سَقِيمٌ, then he said, I am sick. So as the story goes, when his people asked him to join them in the festivities, he looked up towards the stars in contemplation and he thought for a moment, and then he said, Inni saqim, I am really sick. Now, looked up to the stars is an idiomatic expression meaning to contemplate something, interpreted here to mean that Ibrahim alayhi salam cast his glance upward while contemplating what to say and do. As is common, that when someone wants to come up with something to say, they might look up towards the sky. They're in a moment of deep thought and reflection and contemplation. فَنَظَرَ نَظْرَةً فِي النُّجُومِ, and then he came up with this excuse of being sick. فَقَالَ إِنِّي سَقِيمٌ, that I am sick. And this is not considered to be a lie, because he meant that his heart was sickened, disturbed, and disgusted because of their idol worship and rejection of the truth. And within the framework of the Sharia, the scholars refer to this as tawriya. Right? Tawriya is when you say something with a particular intention, but your audience understands it in a different way. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is saying, Inni saqim, I'm sick. So the audience understood what he meant is that he's physically sick, but what he really meant is, I am sick and tired of your idol worship. Right? I'm sick of your disgusting behavior and practices. I remember there's one of our teachers told us a story of a scholar there was a warrant for his arrest from the colonial British powers, and they had never seen him before. They had never seen a picture of him before, and they came to his masjid to arrest him, and they asked him, oh, have you seen so and so? Like, he was there in the masjid, and they asked him himself, have you seen this person? So he took a step backwards and says, oh, he was here a second ago. Right? So that's tawriya. Right? Tawriya is when you say something with a particular intention and you mean something, but the audience perhaps understands something else. So because his people were so busy preparing for this celebration and they were excited about their festival, they left him and they said, فَتَوَلَّوْا عَنْهُ مُدْبِرِينَ. Right? They turned their backs on him, they left him, and they went away. So this was the chance, this was the opportunity that Ibrahim alayhi salam had been waiting for. He went straight to their false deities and he saw all of these exquisite foods and fruits placed before them as an offering. And in Surah Al-Anbiya, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that then he stealthily advanced towards their gods and said mockingly, will you not eat? What is wrong with you that you cannot speak? And it's mentioned here as well. فَرَاغَ إِلَىٰ آلِيَتِهِمْ فَقَالَ أَلَا تَأْكُلُونَ. Right? He went stealthily, he went secretly towards their false gods and deities, and he said mockingly, أَلَا تَأْكُلُونَ. Will you not eat? Will you not eat these fruits and this food that's been placed in front of you? مَا لَكُمْ لَا تَنْتِقُونَ. And what is wrong with you that you cannot speak? So he's asking the idols and statues sarcastically, won't you eat this food that's been placed in front of you? And he continued with his sarcasm and said, what is wrong with you that you cannot speak? And then he put his plan into action and he destroyed the idols. فَأَقْبَلُوا فَفَرَاغَ عَلَيْهِمْ ضَرْبًا بِالْيَمِينِ. Then he swiftly turned on them, striking them with his right hand. So according to the narrations, he took an axe and he broke all of the idols into small pieces and fragments of wood and stone, but he left the largest idol untouched, and then he hung the axe around its neck so that they may return to it. And he left the largest idol untouched because he wanted his people to come back and see how helpless these false deities truly were. And he wanted them to realize the absurdity, the stupidity of their beliefs and practices, and he wanted them to start realizing their errors and to start thinking properly. So now his people, they were enjoying their time, they were celebrating, and now they have made their way back, and they come to see their idols, and they came back to a very shocking scene. Right? They found all of their false gods, all of their deities and their idols destroyed and shattered into pieces except for the largest one. And the largest idol was there standing alone with an axe around its neck. And this must have been very jarring. It must have been very shocking. Imagine how they must have felt that they just came back from a celebration to find all of their quote-unquote gods broken into pieces. And in Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the conversation that takes place between Ibrahim alayhi salam and his people at this point. That when they came back and they found their idols were all destroyed, they had this conversation with Ibrahim alayhi salam. Here in Surah Al-Ṣāffāt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not mention that conversation. Rather, he fast forwards again and he comes to their confrontation with Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Allah tells us, فَأَقْبَلُوا إِلَيْهِ يَزِفُّونَ. His people came rushing towards him furiously. His people came rushing towards him in a state of anger, because news circulated quickly among them, and they unflinchingly sought to confront him. They were angry, agitated, and they were in large numbers while he was alone. Yet Ibrahim alayhi salam had his iman. He had no fear whatsoever, and he did not fear the consequences of what he did, because he did it based upon his iman, based upon his belief. It was part of his mission to invite people towards this truth and this reality, that he had his iman, he knew its simple details, recognizing its soundness within himself and seeing its evidence in the universe around him. This made him stronger than this agitated, angry multitude with its confused beliefs and ignorant concepts. And that's a very profound point to reflect upon. That the people of faith, right, regardless of their numbers, if they hold on firmly to their iman, if they're sticking to their beliefs and their principles, that iman will always be more powerful and more mighty than any false belief, regardless of how large their numbers might be. So he put his argument straight, caring little for their number and their anger, and he said, قَالَ أَتَعْبُدُونَ مَا تَنْحِتُونَ. That how can you worship what you carve with your own hands? How in the world can you worship these idols that you literally made with your own two hands? وَاللَّهُ خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. When it is Allah who created you and whatever you do. So how in the world can you worship something that you created and sculpted with your own hands when you should be worshiping the creator of this entire universe and every single thing it contains? So Ibrahim alayhi salam, his argument was simple, it was clear, straightforward, and unambiguous. There's no confusion regarding it whatsoever. But his community, they were blinded by their anger, their pride, their arrogance. And in their anger, pride, and arrogance, they decided to retaliate against Ibrahim alayhi salam. So instead of humbling themselves and accepting the truth, they chose tyranny and oppression. And they decided to punish Ibrahim alayhi salam and make an example out of him. And this is the general conduct, this is the general behavior of the arrogant and powerful who become frustrated and are unable to respond intellectually. That's almost part of human nature. It's human behavior. That when human beings feel cornered and they're unable to respond rationally, intellectually, they resort to threats of violence and they resort to persecution. And that's exactly what his community did. قَالُوا ابْنُوا لَهُ بُنْيَانًا فَأَلْقُوهُ فِي الْجَحِيمِ. They said to each other, build him a furnace and cast him into this blazing fire. And this is the only logic that tyranny knows. It cares little for arguments and proof. Tyrants know that they cannot face the word of truth with its overpowering appeal. And the surah again, it gives us no details of what happened after they issued their orders. It simply shows the outcome with the fulfillment of Allah's promise to His true servants and His warning to the non-believers. So فَأَرَادُوا بِهِ كَيْدًا فَجَعَلْنَاهُمُ الْأَسْفَلِينَ. They schemed, they plotted to harm him, but we caused them to be humiliated. Right? فَأَرَادُوا بِهِ كَيْدًا. His people, his community, they plotted and schemed against him. فَجَعَلْنَاهُمُ الْأَسْفَلِينَ. But we made them humiliated. So what chance has such scheming when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants it to be foiled? What can frail and powerless tyrants who cling to power do when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of His true servants? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives us a little bit more detail regarding their scheming and plotting in Surah Al-Anbiya. That we are told that His people decided to ignite a large pit of fire and throw Ibrahim alayhi salam into it. So in Surah Ibrahim or Anbiya we're told, قَالُوا حَرِّقُوهُ وَانْصُرُوا آلِهَتَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ فَاعِلِينَ. His people said, burn him and support your gods if you are going to do anything. And according to the story, his community, they dug a huge pit and they started to gather firewood from all over the town, and they continued to gather firewood for 1 full month. Right? According to the narrations, they continued to gather all of this wood for an entire month. And they gathered this ridiculous amount of firewood, they put it in this pit, and they set it on fire, and they continued fanning it for the next 7 days until it became a very large, blazing, raging fire. And Ibn Kathir rahimahullah, he mentions that the fire produced sparks and flames the like of which were never seen before. And the fire was burning with such rage and intensity that it was impossible for anyone to come close to it. So they had to tie Ibrahim alayhi salam and throw him into it. And Ibrahim alayhi salam continued to recite the words, لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك رب العالمين لك الحمد ولك الملك لا شريك لك. That there's no God but you, Lord of the worlds, all praise and kingdom belong to you, and you have no partner. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma narrated that when Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown into this fire, he recited, Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakeel. That Allah is sufficient for me, and He is the best of protectors. Hasbi Allah. Allah is enough for me. I have Allah on my side. I have the truth on my side. I have no fear of what's going to happen. Wa ni'mal wakeel, and He is the best of protectors. And this is the exact same thing that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said when the hypocrite said to him that indeed the people have gathered against you, so fear them. But it merely increased them in faith, and they said, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakeel. And Imam al-Qurtubi, rahimahullah, he brings a narration from Ubay ibn Ka'b radiyallahu anhu that when Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown into the fire, the angel Jibreel alayhi salam appeared and said, Ya Ibrahim, do you need anything? And he replied, from you, no. So Jibreel said, ask your Lord. And Ibrahim alayhi salam responded, Allah knows my condition. I don't need to ask, He knows what's happening, and He will take care of me. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلْنَا يَا نَارُ كُونِي بَرْدًا وَسَلَامًا عَلَى إِبْرَاهِيمَ. That, O fire, be cool and be a source of safety and protection upon Ibrahim alayhi salam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the fire, whose natural attribute is to burn, to be cold and a source of peace and safety and security for Ibrahim alayhi salam. And that is the power, that is the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has made it His responsibility to protect His prophets and messengers from harm. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that their plan and attempt to harm Ibrahim alayhi salam was a complete and total failure. In Surah Al-Anbiya it says, وَأَرَادُوا بِهِ كَيْدًا فَجَعَلْنَاهُمُ الْأَخْسَرِينَ. So the wording is very similar with a slight difference. فَأَرَادُوا بِهِ كَيْدًا, that's shared, right? They planned and they plotted and they schemed against him. In Al-Anbiya it says, فَجَعَلْنَاهُمُ الْأَخْسَرِينَ. But we made His people the greatest losers. And here it says, فَجَعَلْنَاهُمُ الْأَسْفَلِينَ. We totally humiliated His community. So His nation, His own people, they tried to harm Him by burning Him alive. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saved Him from the fire, protected Him from being burnt, and made His people the greatest of losers. And He totally humiliated them. Now that is one scene from the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam that's being mentioned here in Surah al-Ṣāffāt. And again, it highlights the absolute trust and the absolute tawakkul that Ibrahim alayhi salam had in his Lord. That he did not fear anyone or anything because he realized and he recognized that the truth was on his side. And that should be the attitude that all of us adopt as believers. That we should have absolute 100% certainty, absolute 100% confidence that we have the truth. We should not be embarrassed. We should not have this inferiority complex. We should stick to our deen, stick to our principles, no matter what's happening around us, no matter what's going to happen to us or with us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there to protect us and take care of us and help us and assist us. And it also has some pointers and some guidance for when it comes to giving da'wah. Right? When it comes to inviting other people towards belief, we are not supposed to necessarily adopt this antagonistic attitude first and foremost, but we're supposed to speak to people and rationally explain to them why their beliefs are false. We're supposed to help them realize and recognize the false nature of their beliefs and bring them closer to understanding the truth. So inshallah, we'll stop here for tonight. And from next Wednesday, we'll pick up with the second episode from the life of Ibrahim alayhi salam, where he sees in his dream that he is being told to sacrifice his son Ismail alayhi salam. So we'll cover that next week inshallah. And then we'll talk about all the lessons and reminders from both stories. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept the small effort of ours to place it on a scale of good deeds on the Day of Judgment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make all of us among Ahlul Quran, الَّذِينَ هُمْ أَهْلُ اللَّهِ وَخَاصَّتُهُ. May the Quran be approved for us, not against us. May the Quran be an intercessor for us on the Day of Judgment. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to follow in the footsteps of Ibrahim alayhi salam and all of the prophets and messengers, particularly our beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. صلى الله وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا مولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.